So we've talked briefly about HTTP bearer authentication. So, why am I differentiating between bearer authentication and OIDC login? In They're actually two very different flows that have two very different purposes. Okay, they're not technically very different flows. We can talk about that a bit later with some exciting network diagrams that I've written. I'm sure everyone is quaking in anticipation, but OIDC login is really the web browser login, much like SAML. So you've probably seen this with, Domino or, with your bank or any other scenarios. SAML is very widely used in the enterprise space today. The user authenticates and then they get back a session cookie, like a DOMOS SID or an LTPA token. But unlike SAML, it doesn't require support for posts and forms in JavaScript. It only needs 302 redirects. So it can work in scenarios and clients that cannot handle SAML. Some of them will be able to handle the OIDC login flow more easily. But from a apples to apples comparison, OIDC login is the apples to apples comparison to a SAML login, whereas SAML to HTTP bearer flow would be apples to pears. They don't really serve the same niche. They have different purposes in life. So why would you want to use OIDC login versus SAML? Well, I mean, if you have SAML today and it works today for your applications, by all means, keep using it. What I will say is that OIDC is newer than SAML, and so many attacks that have been discovered over the years since SAML was released are guarded against more effectively by OIDC. In particular, the current recommended flow by current best practices is the authorization code flow with PKCE. That is the flow that Domino uses in this case. Really, all of the other flows described in OIDC are sort of legacy hangovers from OAuth, and you should never be using any of them because they all have hideous security vulnerabilities. So stick with the authorization code flow with PKCE. But it protects against man-in-the-middle attacks. It even protects against compromise of the client secret. So it was originally designed for public clients, for things like I'm distributing a mobile application and it's going to be on thousands or hundreds of thousands of handsets, or I'm distributing a single page app on web browsers and it's going to be on hundreds of browsers across our organization. In that scenario, the concept of a secret is absurd. I mean, you're distributing that secret along with your code to thousands of people. That's not a secret anymore. So for these public applications, PKCE or PIXE actually allows you to have security without a client secret. And so it's actually recommended even for flows where you have a client secret because it means compromise of that client secret isn't a big deal. So this flow is much easier to configure than SAML. You only have one URL to use. You don't have issues with rekeying, which you do with SAML, where with SAML, if you have a static partnership built between both sides, if you want to update the keys on either side, you then need to persuade, both sides to trust the old key and the new key before you can switch to the new key. And that is a concept that is not widely supported in the SAML world. Domino actually added support for that in 12.0.2. So you can roll over your SAML keys on your identity provider non-disruptively to Domino, but it's still a major headache because you are exchanging XML metadata, you're updating your partnership. You need to do that before you update the identity provider. And then after the identity provider is updated, you go back to the service provider and remove the old key. That's a very heavyweight process. With OIDC, the keys are cached for potentially minutes or hours at a time based on cache control headers. They're being dynamically pulled. So you could literally configure an OIDC provider to update their keys every 8 hours and do so non-disruptively. And this flow in particular, the OIDC login flow, is what most people think of when they talk about OpenID Connect, when they talk about OIDC authentication. Most people would be talking about this pattern, not about using an OIDC provider to acquire access tokens for HTTP bearer authentication. In particular, because this is the pattern supported by many cloud and social identity providers. So you can use the Azure AD or sign in with Google or Yahoo are all supported with this pattern in 12.0.2. And we are, continuously trying to find more providers and test them and either, find out if they work, find out if they don't really support OIDC, or, what we can do to make them better interoperate with Domino.
The main message that I'm hearing here is that it's going to make your applications much cleaner, much more user friendly, and modern, easier to use, a better user experience.
Yes. I've been working on Domino Security for many, many, many years now, and for a terrifying number of years now. And even I find configuring a SAML partnership to be complicated. I need to pull up the documentation and the SAML identity providers documentation, and you go back and forth and fight with all of the details to get everything right. It takes a great deal of expertise and practice to build a SAML partnership. With OIDC, you're entering a single URL into a single field in IDP cat, and then it works.
So the grief that developers get from admins for making their lives more complicated, this is one of those times where the developer can come and say, "I'm making your life easier."
Absolutely. Think of this as an apology for ID file recovery. Props to anyone who remembers that feature.